world. And I was like, okay, like what can I do to like help some people? And I started my YouTube channel then. So my YouTube channel is actually significantly older, but like it's gone through like 5 different iterations of like me trying to become a YouTube star doing different things. And this is the first time I've actually hit any success with it. And so I put out a Tableau tutorial where I taught people, hey, here's a great tool, Tableau. Here's a 3-hour course. You follow this from start to finish. You will know more about Tableau than I did with the first job I got.
This episode of Ken's Nearest Neighbors is powered by Z by HP, HP's high compute, workstation grade line of products and solutions. Today, I had the pleasure of interviewing Shashank Kalanithi. Shashank currently works at Nordstrom as a data analyst and was kindly introduced to me through John David over at the How to Get an Analytics Job podcast. Shashank studied chemistry in undergrad and he quickly pivoted into analytics after getting his first taste of the field. He has a passion for spreading analytics knowledge and sharing his experiences in the data field through his YouTube channel. In this episode, we talk about how Shashank was able to carve out his own path in his work to land his first data role, how he fell in love with Python from being a no-code data analyst, and why he started content creation and consulting during the pandemic. We had a great chat. I hope you enjoyed as well. Shashank, thank you so much for coming on to the Ken's Nearest Neighbors podcast today. We had a really cool discussion last time we spoke. And I'm glad that we can share your story, your experience going from a chemistry degree, going through a non-traditional path, learning these data analysis skills, now to be doing some pretty high-level data analysis, even data science work. So again, thank you for coming in and how you doing today?
Doing well. It's a nice sunny day in Denver over here. So no complaints on my end.
Incredible. So the way I always start these interviews to help people get more acquainted with you is to better understand where you first got introduced to data, or where you first realized data was a viable career path or you had this interest in it. Was this an experience, a singular experience where you're like, wow, this opened my eyes and this is incredible? Or was this more of a progression where you realized over time that this field has a lot of opportunities and could be potentially very interesting for you?
Yeah, so it's a couple of things. And I think like many people, for me, it is a lifetime of experiences that kind of like led me to where I am today as far as data is concerned. So I actually graduated, as you mentioned earlier, with a degree in chemistry. The intention was to become a doctor, but I had no interest in pursuing that. But I didn't quit the degree fast enough. In my senior year, I finally was like, I'm not going to do this. I was very stubborn about it. I'm like, no, I'm going to like follow through. I'm going to get my chemistry degree. And now I have a degree that I don't use at all, except to say that I have the degree. So pro tip for anyone out there, if you really don't want to be doing something, quit early, unless you, I don't know, for whatever reason you have to do it, but it's a little bit of a tangent over there. As far as actually getting into data, after I graduated, I fell into IT just because I needed some kind of a job, and IT was easy enough for me to get a hold of, like an internship over there. And it was an internship that I wanted to convert into a job. So I went to the 6th floor because I just happened to take a supply chain course through one of those like online course guys. And the 6th floor had the supply chain department. And I started asking people, I'm like, hey, like, what do you guys have any work for me? Do you guys have any work for me? Because the IT team obviously didn't want me there. And they obviously like didn't, like, they were like, well, this intern was like foisted upon us. He knows nothing. Why is he here? And so like they told me to like make these diagrams for like complex ERP, like so ERP is like enterprise resource planning. And it's like Oracle, Microsoft has their own, like SAP, these guys all have their own software. And like it's fairly sophisticated software with zero introduction. No one can just pick it up and start, figuring out how it works. So they kind of just like threw it at me and they're like, here, like figure this out. And it's not like the documentation online is like tremendous either. And so that's kind of where I went to the 6th floor. I just ignored whatever work they gave me. I said, like, screw this, I'm not doing this. Went to the 6th floor and started just asking people like, hey, do you have work for me? Do you have work for me? Eventually one team took pity on me, gave me a stack of a Rolodex and said, like, index all these in Excel for us. I went ahead and did that. And the director of that team was like, oh, this guy's like actually like seriously looking for work and is willing to do like basically anything we give him. So she told another director in supply chain who just happened to be setting up an analytics team, and that's kind of how we get into the whole analytics space here. And I had no intention of getting into analytics initially, but I knew whatever career I did, I wanted it to be something with skills. Like I wanted my career to like, not in like a, insane way, but like my career to kind of like be my life in some ways, and that like the skills I learn, I can apply in many different aspects of my life and I can like enjoy it outside of the office. I figure if I'm going to spend the majority of my life working, I might as well enjoy it. And that's kind of like where analytics fit that goal really well. It pays really well. The skills you learn, because data is literally everywhere, can be applied to umpteenth number of things in your real life. Whether if you're a fitness nut, you can there's tons of stuff happening in sports analytics, both at the personal level and at the professional level. If you are into cars like I am, like documenting these massive Excel spreadsheets of like every car type out there and like what is the best car out there, and analyzing that and visualizing that data. This is stuff that I found very cool about analytics that I could do outside of the workplace. And that kind of came from the fact that like a lot of my family members and like uncles and stuff that I knew growing up, they had these like really complicated engineering jobs that like one was like pipe design, and it's like basically they design like oil pipes. Again, great career, pays very well, but like nothing you do there is applicable outside of the office. And I'm like, no, I want something different. And that's how I found analytics. And I've basically fallen in love with it. And like, it's a set of skills that I, at least this stage of my life, I want to pursue and continue building up.
I really love that. And that's also something that I found to be really compelling about the career path as well, is that I started in analytics almost the opposite way, where I was only doing analytics on my own performance. And then I slowly realized that this could be applicable to other spaces. And it seems like you went the other direction, as you're like, wow, this is really interesting. I can apply this at work, but this is something that's scalable to my entire life or to any of these different problems. And again, that's something that I really love about this domain, is that essentially 2021 going forward, every single problem that we face or want to solve is a data problem. And that makes this skill set really exciting, because we have at least some of the tools to answer almost all the questions that we see out there. I also really loved what you were saying about your advice, is that kind of quit early if you're not not interested in a specific path. I think that that's really good advice. And the flip side of that is, if you are really interested in a path, or interested or driven towards something, stick with it a little bit longer than most other people, or significantly longer than most other people. A lot of everyone, including myself, we get really stuck up in this idea of sunk cost, right? You had the sunk cost where you were studying for 3 years in chemistry. Probably your family, at least my family, wanted me to go into medicine, and there was a lot of factors that had happened in the past that suggested we should go in this direction in the future. And it's really important to realize when all of that stuff is not helping push you towards the direction you want to go, you kind of have to cut your losses, even though you invested a lot of time. I think even as data people, the sunk cost fallacy, it still kicks our butt, and it hits very, very frustrating.
I had a business school friend, so I was really lucky to go to school with a bunch of business school people, and I have my opinions on business degrees, but the people I met over there, the friends I made, are easily some of the smartest people I've ever met. And like my roommate was like, Shashank, you cannot keep falling for the sunk cost fallacy. It is going to kill you one day. And he's 100% right, because they learned about that in one of their classes. I think that took up an entire class for one of them. So it was, like I said, opinions on business degrees. But I just, yeah, no, but you're 100% right. And I think a great example of also sticking with it is that I used to hate programming, but I wanted to get into analytics. And so I would put off learning Python for like, I put off learning Python for like the first 1.5 to 2 years of my career. I was like, I'm not going to learn this. I'm going to do everything I can to avoid it. And the thing is, these days, there are tools available that help you avoid it for a long, long time. So like Alteryx is what I was using for the longest time, and Tableau. So Alteryx, for anyone that doesn't know, just think about it as an R Python replacement. They hate marketing it like that, but that's what it is basically. It's a GUI interface where you can just link together all these different steps that you would normally type out in code, and it'll perform it for you. And it's actually quite performant. It is a great piece of software.
It's mostly for data manipulation, correct? That is
exactly
the key use case. So it's like, the way I've heard it described is like a combination of GUI for SQL, as well as any data manipulation you'd use in Python or R. Is that Like
So
a
I think a couple of years ago that would have been 100% accurate, but they've been really pushing into the modeling space.
interesting.
Again, like at the end of the day, there's always going to be a Python library available for for TensorFlow, or anything that you're doing out there before it's available on Alteryx. But they are pushing harder and harder into the modeling space. And I will say that given that a lot of like basic modeling, so like your KNNs, random force and stuff like that are actually quite effective. I would still say it's a great tool, but the thing is, I was using it as a crutch and an excuse not to learn Python. And then eventually I just like said, okay, like, you know what, let me like just buck up and like learn this language. And I mean, now I love programming. I like just love having an IDE in front of me all the time, just like working on different problems and stuff like that. But that would be an example of like something I didn't like doing, like that, like those hills to like learn this language were not at all any fun. But that was a struggle that was 100% worth it versus like the struggle of my degree, I would say was not worth it.
I love that. And why don't we dive a little bit more into that experience using Tableau and Alteryx and just learning that and what opportunities you were able to access without even the programming skills in the data analysis space.
Yeah. Okay. So about to have a salary reveal over here. So for my this just ties into the conversation. So the first job I got, I was paid $55,000 in Dallas, Texas. So you can take that and translate to whatever location you live in. So $55,000 in Dallas, Texas. I remember Texas no state income tax, so I get to keep all of that except for the federal part. And I was very happy with that as a starting salary. And that starting salary was basically to like work with Alteryx and Tableau. And I came into that job with zero experience. This is that job where they were just like setting up an analytics team. And I was very lucky to work for a
And
company
so
that really respects employees.
that was from the internship in the same company?
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool, cool, cool.
So the internship was like $10 an hour or something. And then they hired me full time at that rate. And the reason I brought up that whole salary is because after like running my own YouTube channel for a while, I've started to realize that I was someone who was very fortunate for the salaries that I've been receiving from people. And I want people to be aware that, oh, there are opportunities like this for relatively low skill people. At that point in time, I would call myself a very low skill individual. Like I was well spoken and I was an intelligent person, but like I didn't know how to actually manipulate data. My first boss and I still joke around about what we call the MCU to MCU join, where MCU is a field inside JD Edwards that stands for business unit. And basically what happened, there's like 5 business units in the company,
It's
but
not
every
the
single
Marvel
transaction,
Cinematic Universe.
it is not, no.
Oh, bummer. That sounds a lot more
um,
fun.
you would think so, yeah. But basically like on an order transaction table, right? Like there's going to be a business unit on every single row, but there's only like 5 business units in the entire company. So like if you join MCU to MCU from a purchase order table and a sales order table, yeah, it was like a trillion row table by the time I was done with it. And we still joke around about how like I went to my boss very proudly and I said, "Here's your data, sir. Like, this is the join you asked me to do, right?" So the reason I tell the story is because I want people to know that like that's where I got started. I was doing these like really basic ass joins that like were completely wrong, no skills, but the opportunity does exist as long as you're willing to learn, you're willing to put the time in, and 100% there's luck involved too. Like I was very lucky my first job just happened to offer me that much, which I think is they very much overpaid me for the level of experience I came in with.
Awesome. And again, so let's go on from that. What was the next transition like? What was the learning curve? How did you learn those things on the job? What was or what did you take away from that whole experience?
Yeah, so the lucky thing is that so Alteryx kind of has like these like little icons and stuff. So for example, for a join, there's literally like a button that says join. There's a union button. Basically, every major data operation you have, or SQL operation, really, to your point, that you have, there's a button for it in Alteryx or like a little tool for it. And then so like what I would do is I dedicated myself to learning how to like work Alteryx, and so I went onto their documentation and just like studied it and studied it. And then like applied it to like whatever tasks I could get from my boss. And luckily my boss was, awesome and gave me like a solid like month or so to just like learn how the tool worked. And I think that was also smart on his end because it's much better for him to give me a month to like learn the tool and then come in with more experience. It's like, okay, this is how we can actually like use it. And I think that's how I like learned all the stuff. So like that's how I like learned about unions, joins, duplication errors, all the basic stuff you have to learn in data manipulation that like will help you start off a data career. And that's where Alteryx was a very soft like start for all this stuff. And then Tableau, the great thing is Tableau is it's a great tool if your data is clean. Otherwise, it's a
Pain
pain
in
to
the ass, yeah.
use. Yeah, it's a huge pain, and I don't think they develop features fast enough, but that's a different complaint. Especially, I was using Google Data Studio, which is free and works like just as well as Tableau. It's amazing.
Interesting. When
Yeah, you should try it out.
I tried it when it first came out. I think this
Mm.
is like I was trying the beta. I think it was maybe, oh my goodness, like 3 years ago. It's still pretty new, right?
Okay. Yeah. I used it just a couple months ago, actually.
I have to give it another go. That's something that I'm very interested in exploring a little bit more.
I use it for my clients. It's because it's free and it works really well.
Interesting. Do they
Yeah.
do they have like a private side of that too, where you can keep your data obscured and those types of things?
Yeah. So what I do is so with my clients, I personally suggest Google Cloud, because my clients aren't like large corporations; they're smaller shops. So I'm like, you don't need like AWS to scale and everything, and not that Google Cloud can't do that. But Google Cloud is less used in the industry than AWS or Azure are. So I suggest Google Cloud because we can put everything inside the Google Suite, store the data inside BigQuery or MySQL inside Google Cloud, and then just pull it using the Data Studio, and it's locked by account. So you need to have the appropriate credentials to be able to access it. Kind of like a Google Doc. You can keep them private if you want to.
Interesting. I might experiment with that with some of my clients as well. That's pretty interesting, and something you learn something new every time you do one of these, right?
Yeah.
But so rolling back just a little bit to the Alteryx and Tableau conversation, do you think that's a viable path to learning the analytics skill set or even the coding skill set? Did you feel that you were more prepared going through those, where you have a lot of the GUI interface where you're doing very similar things, and then you start to break it down even further into the code elements? Or would you have preferred if you had just jumped in with the coding first, or is that something that is dependent on the individual people? I mean, I obviously went kind of from the other end, is where I was doing SQL before I ever saw Alteryx. I was coding in Python around this. No, I guess I used Tableau just a little bit before I started in Python, but Tableau, the licenses, unless you're a student, are not free, and there's some limitations to that.
Yeah, that's a difficult question to answer. I think it depends on the individual. So I guess to answer the base question you asked as to like whether it's valid, 100%. I think I'm a living example of like someone who came in with zero experience. I started with those tools, and now I can keep up with the best of them. It's, when it comes to like Python, to a much lesser extent R, and then obviously SQL. Just because once you have those base concepts, and this is the thing you like notice with like all these tools, right? Once you have like the base concept like figured out using one tool, then it's easy to look at documentation from there. So like, for example, once I learned how data works in Alteryx, I was able to ask myself, or I was able to like look up on Google, how do you join using Python? And then that led me to pandas, and that led me to people saying use merge instead of join. So for example, I use merges, I don't use joins in Python, which was a little bit confusing, but it is what it is. I don't
You
know why
get
they
used
call
to
it
it.
that.
I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
either.
But
No, I really like that. I think the big takeaway that I have from that is that, if you start somewhere with any of these tools, you can
mhm.
still create an opportunity for yourself. And learning one tool allows you to kind of pull at a thread and learn other tools, or accumulate these other knowledges. You start to build out this sort of mind map of how everything fits together. And after you've learned a couple, or you go start, pulling on those threads, the next thread starts to become a lot more clear, and it's easier to pick up any of these individual things. And I really love that. I can't stress that enough. I'm maybe a little biased in this sense, but the more you learn, the more you immerse yourself in this, even if it's just one tool, right? Let's say I only use Python. If I understand a lot of the mechanisms in Python, it's really not that hard to pick up R, because
Exactly.
there's so many similar things. Even some of the packages are virtually identical. So I just really love how your story and your experiences kind of illustrate that high level, I guess, that high level concept.
Well, and just as a small tangent to exactly what you said, right? Like the data space. So, I work at Nordstrom right now, and we support both R. And I work on an analytics team, and we support both R and Python equally on our team. And if you go to the Pandas documentation, there is, so for anyone that's not aware, Pandas stands for panel data, and it's basically the main package used in Python to manipulate tabular data. So that's what people who use Python will use to manage tabular data in like 90% of cases. They actually have an entire section of the pandas documentation that's like, if you're coming from R, this means this. If you're coming from SQL, this means this. Like the entire data space is converging, and you have a great video on this actually of where you were talking about like the total number of data professionals needed is like we do not have the amount of talent necessary to fill in the number of positions necessary. And because of that, I think a lot of teams are becoming more flexible, where a team might be Python exclusive or R exclusive. Now there's like, okay, no, we just need people that know data, and we will like figure out how to like train you on the job or like fit together all these pieces on the job. So it kind of goes to what you were saying earlier, and I would say like the technology doesn't matter too much, and it's all about knowing the concepts. That being said, knowing Python or R will give you the most flexibility in like looking for a job. I'm not going to pretend that's not true, but I mean, as long as you know the context, you know the context.
Yeah, I think that it's becoming more and more the case. If you can do the work, people don't as much care, not how it's done, but what tools you use to do it. I think that that's becoming more and more compelling. And if you are able to find the solution, you probably become more and more tool agnostic as you go along, because you're getting better and better, and you're understanding the feature space and the dynamics of it significantly better. So one thing I do want to ask, we might as well finish your career arc and talk about how you transition from role to role. I would really like to hear, again, how you moved out of a role that was essentially primarily focused on Tableau and Alteryx into something where you're using different tools and you're experimenting and doing, from what I understand, significantly more nuanced analysis.
Yeah. Okay. So that happened when I moved from my first job to my second job. So my first job, they provided me with an Alteryx license. They provided me with a Tableau license. I go to my second job, and so I was actually poached from my second company, from my first company, by someone at my first company who became a VP at the second one, and he wanted me to basically be like his like data jockey. And I'll also give this as I like to like throw these like little tidbits for people that are like looking for career tidbits. Be friendly with everyone at the workplace if you can, because like this guy was like someone I worked with like once or twice, but like he remembered a thing or two I said in the meeting, and because of that he offered me like a significant a significant salary bump and a great job when he moved companies. Like you never know when you'll make these great connections. But back to the story of like how I transitioned. I will say transitioned off of Alteryx, because I don't use Alteryx anymore. Is I went to this new job, and Alteryx licenses are $6,000 per person per year. They are very expensive, especially if you want to like use them with an entire analytics team. Like it starts to become quite expensive to like hire people that know it, and then give them this tool, and then have them derive value from this tool. And so my boss like asked, like we didn't have him at the company. He asked me, like, "Oh, do you like want an Alteryx license?" And I said no. And it was interesting because like the second I said no, in my head I was like, I made a big mistake, because you have to understand, like my experience was very much like as someone who like cleaned up data and like got data ready for like these Tableau workbooks. But without Alteryx, I don't actually know how to do that. It's crazy. It's kind of like it's like you are a great chef, but then all of a sudden you realize, oh wait, I can't I don't know how to use an egg beater, or I don't know how to like mix up my own cake batter without this like automatic machine. What do I do? And so I forced myself into that pressurized situation where I had to derive value for this guy that, great boss. He really trusted me and was expecting me to derive value for the significantly higher salary he was paying me. While at the same time, like having the data knowledge, but not the actual like execution ability, because I didn't know Python or anything back then to actually like achieve these tasks. So by putting myself in that pressure cooker, I forced myself to learn SQL, and I forced myself to learn Python, because I'm like, my job, my this awesome job hangs in the balance, and probably, at least for me, more importantly, like what people call face, like my self-worth, or like hanging in the balance of like actually being able to say I can do the stuff I said I could do. And that's kind of like where I crash course my way into Python and SQL, where I would like look up stuff very quickly, and I would first like draw out the flow on like my iPad, pretending I had Alteryx. And then I would be like, okay, like, how do you do this? How do you do this? How do you do this in Python? And then like string together all these steps. And I will say Kaggle has by far one of the best Python courses out there for data professionals, because it is not for engineers. It's not for software developers. It's like, here's how you use pandas. Here's how you use NumPy. Here's how you use scikit-learn. The stuff that you need as like base knowledge for data professionals. So that's how I got into it. I still use Tableau today. I'm not very happy with any of the Python graphing libraries. Like Plotly is my favorite one so far. But I mean, even that, like I'd rather just drag and drop than like type in, 4 lines of code to get an okay chart. So I still use Tableau for everything. Also, like, every company I've gone to has some BI tool available to use.
Awesome. I got to have you check out Atoti. They sponsored my last video, and I've been.
I saw that. I was looking at that. It looked really cool.
Yeah, I'm gonna actually do a legitimate analysis with them using the tool in a couple months, and I'll give you any or feel free to watch it and see what you think.
Definitely,
but something that I really enjoyed about what you said is how you actively made a choice to put yourself in the pressure cooker. That's something that I really also try to do, is to put external pressure, especially social pressure, on myself to perform and to meet standards. I mean, that's something related to YouTube. That's something related to any of the projects that I want to pursue. If I tell people that I'm going to do it, I would like to believe that I'm someone that's in line with what I say, or that acts in line with what I say. And inherently humans want to be that person that is in line with what they say. And that little bit of extra pressure has been unbelievably powerful to me. I would hope it's been unbelievably powerful to a lot of people who have been part of the 66 Days of Data Challenge. But just putting yourself out there, and it doesn't have to necessarily be with a huge community, but it could be with a accountability partner. It could be with your boss. It could be with these people. That is such a powerful lever to pull to actually get you to do something. And I'm always fascinated personally with what levers I can pull to like either trick myself or get myself to do things that I don't want to do, or that I do want to do, but I'm scared of doing, or that there's apprehension, or any of these types of things. This episode of Ken's Nearest Neighbors is brought to you by Z by HP. HP's high compute, workstation grade line of products and solutions. Z is specifically made for high performance data science solutions, and I personally use the ZBook Studio and the Z4 workstation. I really love that the Z line can come standard with Linux, and they also can be configured with the data science software stack. With the software stack, you can get right into the work of doing data science on day one without the overhead of having to completely reconfigure your new machine. Now back to our show.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I will, I guess I do have to also mention that at the time I was living with my parents. So it is very much a privilege to be able to be I'm going to risk my job over this one thing I said. I don't think I would have been fired, honestly. But I wouldn't have been surprised if I was. But that very much is a privilege, and that I had no, commitments outside of my student debt. Because I could just go live with my parents if for whatever reason I failed. So I like to give people a very honest perspective on sometimes stuff sounds amazing when someone just says it, but you have to also understand maybe they had it easy in some other ways and not in other ways. So I would say in one way, that's how I had it easy, in that if I failed and I lost my job, I would just go live at home rent free and look for another one.
Well, I think that's a really important conversation to have, and I think about this quite a bit, and I look at it as a calculated risk. So a couple examples of that are, for example, I went to get my master's in computer science very specifically. I accumulated a lot of debt because of it, quite a bit. But I saw that as the best opportunity for me to pursue the entrepreneurial endeavors that I wanted to have job stability going forward, whether it's in the data space or the software engineering space. I just saw that as something for me to open up as many doors as possible, to give me the biggest safety net, to have the most opportunities if the things that I was pursuing did not work out. Obviously, again, I took on a lot of debt, but the risk associated with that, and me thinking about how much money I would make from XYZ degrees, that risk was hedged to a certain extent. I also, it's not like I'm just getting this degree. I was working on my portfolio. I was talking to people. I was doing all these things. And it became apparent to me that if I was doing all those things, the odds of me going jobless were relatively low, because I was doing all the right things, and the odds of me being able to have the skills and the know-how, know the people to pursue the things that I was really passionate about and that I cared about kept going up. And so that trade-off always made sense. And I was very fortunate in having a similar situation where I could go back with my parents if I needed to. I had a lot of these opportunities, and that all factored into that equation. would I have taken on as much debt as I did to go to grad school 2 times if I didn't have like that safety net of, hey, I could potentially go back and live with my parents if I needed to? I really can't say. Probably not. Unfortunately, I haven't had to do that. I mean, maybe I am now in Hawaii, but that's more of my own volition and, helping them take care of the house and do whatever. But definitely an important dialogue that everyone should be having, right?
Mhm.
If you're considering going back to school, think about the actual tangible costs versus the benefits. A lot of the times, if you're factoring the risk of not getting a job, if you're not going to be putting in the extra effort or the trying to get the internships or putting in the portfolio, it's definitely not worth it.
100%. And I mean that's exactly what you said. At the end of the day, like, take a look at your own life, right? Speaking to the audience over here, and like what risks are, given your current like position in life, are you able to say, like, reasonably safely take, right? And I think that's where you decide, okay, that's where the pressure cooker method, I think, works the best. When, like, if you fail, there is a real consequence.
But it's not
But
the
you also
ultimate.
want, right. You're not like dooming yourself to what I call a snowball of failure, because I experienced that in college because I hated my degree so much, of what I call like the snowball of failure, where like each failure compounds upon itself and makes you more and more miserable, and it's harder and harder to like dig yourself out of it. And now I feel very lucky in that I'm in the exact opposite situation, where after finding a career I really love and earning the kind of money that makes me feel very safe and stable. Because for me, money is primarily a means for stability. Stuff happens in life, stuff happens in the world. I have like my ability to maintain my standard of living, and I am experiencing the exact opposite. So that's where it's like a snowball of success, where stuff is like kind of compounding for me right now, and like decisions I've made in the last couple of years are paying off today. And I think that's where you got to, like, the audience has to take a look at their own life and their own situation and kind of like look at, okay, what should I do? And I only bring that up because I do a live stream every week, and I get some people asking me like, what exactly should I do, Shashank? And I'm like, without a lot of context, it's hard to say. Your life is very different than mine. A lot of people are coming in from different countries, and like, I can tell you about the US job market and maybe the Canadian one, because I assume to some extent it's similar to the US one. But beyond that, you just got to take in all the information and make your own decision based on your own life.
Yeah, absolutely. And for everyone listening, we'll have the Shashank's live stream and his YouTube channel linked in the description below. I get those questions quite a bit as well. Should I pursue this degree? Is this good? Is this, I'm in between these things at my job. And at a surface level, it seems like that's an easy question to answer, right? But if you take this a level down or 2 levels down, it's all up to what you want to get out of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are you trying to maximize free time? Are you trying to maximize income? Are you trying to maximize work-life balance? And or is this a combination of forces? Are you trying to maximize on geography? Like, every individual person's like motivations for landing a job or getting into this field are a little bit different. And my motivations are fundamentally different than maybe what yours are, or what other people's are. I value freedom, time freedom, and like the ability to work where I want significantly more than I value like monetary income,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like that means way more. I make a lot less money than I could if I was working in a different company. But the company that I work at, I have so much more freedom, an incredible amount of autonomy, a lot of interest in the actual content of my work, and that drives so much more happiness for me than a lot of the other things could. I'm not saying what I value is right, but I'm saying that what I value is very likely different from quite a few other people.
Exactly.
So let's talk a little bit more about sort of that negative feedback loop, or that negative
Mm-hmm.
snowball that we were talking about. I know that during the pandemic, there was some challenging spaces for you, and I'd love to hear about what that experience was like and how you got out of it.
Yeah. Okay. So, pandemic, what that was? Wow, we're over a year now.
Yeah, I guess we're still
Geez.
technically, but during the start, if I recall, there was
It,
some real
yeah,
challenges.
it was a lot worse. Yeah. So March 2020. living in the United States, I'll call that the start of the pandemic. Obviously, it started in November, December in other parts of the world, but March for the sake of Americans here. Yeah, so pandemic starts, and a lot of people very close to me suddenly and without, any expectation, lost their jobs, just gone. Luckily, everyone I knew was put on furlough, so they got to keep health insurance, which, again, given that there isn't a public option in the U.S. for most people, like that is a godsend. That you don't have to. That if something happens to you, you're not going to be like bankrupted over medical bills. And the reason that was important is because the people I knew that I'm talking about tended to be in their 40s and 50s, and places where like, oh, like I really do need to be concerned about making sure I have insurance. So, but all of a sudden the income was gone, and the reason that this happened is that the people I knew, a lot of them worked in industries that were basically just gutted by the pandemic, and industries that like we're not even sure they're coming back anymore, honestly. And a lot of people I knew also had jobs that that were not particularly remote friendly. Now, myself, on the other hand, the pandemic happened and my life became exponentially better and more convenient, I'd say, at least, in that like I don't have to commute anymore. I don't have to spend money on gas. I don't have to spend money eating out. I can just eat at home now. My job is very remote friendly. The industry I was working for is not at all affected by the pandemic, or was affected by the pandemic, but in a very measurable way. And that was a big thing, right? Like a lot of people that like lost their jobs, a lot of them lost their jobs because companies were so uncertain about the future. But the company that I worked for was like, okay, the education sector is gone. Like we know that, but everyone else is fine because we do a lot of residential stuff. And so that's kind of where, when the pandemic started, I saw all this like suffering in the world, and I was like, okay, like what can I do to like help some people? And I started my YouTube channel then. So my YouTube channel is actually significantly older, but like it's gone through like 5 different iterations of like me trying to become a YouTube star, doing different things. And this is the first time I've actually hit any success with it. And so I put out a Tableau tutorial where I taught people, hey, here's a great tool, Tableau. Here's a 3-hour course. You follow this from start to finish. You will know more about Tableau than I did with the first job I got. And the reason I started with Tableau, the reason I started with Tableau is because it is a tool that I believe almost anyone can find some use for, in the sense that like many people out there, even if you're not like a proper data professional, you will have access to some data that needs to be presented in some nice way to some group of higher ups. Even if you're the CEO of a company, you need to present stuff to the board. And so having a tool that allows you to like explore data and dynamically present it to people instantly makes you significantly more useful to everyone around you. And again, at the end of the day, like I got a solid remote friendly job, my first job, 55K, basically just messing around with Tableau. And I wanted to spread this opportunity to people. So I put out this free tutorial on my YouTube channel. Didn't get much traction. And then so I was like, okay, whatever, forget about this. Let me go do something else. And then I go and I start my consulting business, because I'm like, okay, I guess I have some free time right now. Let me like start my consulting business and like pick up like different like tasks and stuff that I can do on the side. And I've met some really interesting clients. I've helped someone do what is it called? Not location scouting, network optimization for their factories and for the distribution of like masks amongst their factories. I've helped a nonprofit with help track children inside a foster network. I am currently working with a client who works in the NBA. So we got all kinds of interesting stuff going on over here. And, it's a suggestion to people out there that if you're interested in like, you'll be surprised what you find on Upwork. All kinds of people are there. And I was recently reached out by a really interesting gaming company for a very interesting predictive model that they want to build out. And so what happened was I was like, okay, like it was relatively easy for me to get onto Upwork. It was relatively easy for me to like set up this like small little independent consulting practice where I'm just like doing cool work for clients. How can I spread this knowledge to other people? And then so I put up I think what was my second video on YouTube, which happened about a year later. And that was just, it was my Survey Monkey video where I basically like took a bunch of Survey Monkey data and like I transformed it. And that video went semi-viral. I think now it's at like 750K views or something like that. And people really seem to like the idea of me spending an hour and a half walking through the entire process of like, this is one of the things that a data analyst actually does. Like, it was a day in the life video where I was like, oh, like I would actually spend like 4 hours transforming this data and everything and like getting it ready to like be put into Tableau. And this is kind of like this is where I was starting to hit that snowball of success, I would say. The snowball of failure was very much a college thing. And probably the next year and a half after college. And then like as I started building up these skills and they started compounding on top of each other, I was able to put out a Python course. I was able to put a SQL course all for free on my channel, just to show people I'm like, hey, like this is like, these are useful, tangible skills that are remote friendly, usable in many different industries. Like you said yourself, like we have a shortage of data professionals. We need people that know these skills. Here's a free course, knock yourself out. And that's kind of like what happened to me during the pandemic. And you know, I keep trying to put out these videos as much as I can, of like, you know, what a data analyst actually does, how we actually go about our work. And that was kind of like the story of my pandemic. I started my independent consulting practice, tried to spread the knowledge of like, hey, you can like make real money doing this. And then tried to teach people the actual skills they needed to like do my job.
I think that's really powerful. I mean, that's something that was also front of my mind, is that the work landscape is changing. You know, like people are losing jobs 100%. It's an awful, awful time.
We're still 9 million jobs short from 2019 levels.
Yeah. And to me, that's something that, you know, I'm always trying to think, okay, what could I do that is within my skill set, that is in line with my belief system and those types of things. And I found that content creation is one of the most powerful ways to be able to like maybe selfishly like conveniently spread goodwill or spread knowledge or help people. And it makes me happy to hear that you also saw that one as an opportunity to say, hey, like I can share my experiences, I can share the things that I've learned, and you can follow this path that I took. But it also makes me happy that at least in some way you're being rewarded as well, where there's this snowball of success that's continuing to build and build. Because I think that YouTube, the data science community, these are incredible ecosystems that reward people that give back, that spread information, but they also reward people, well, anyone that wants to be a part of them, because there is such a wealth of awesome information that's out there. So I am every day immensely grateful to be a part of these communities, because of the ones out there, I think, you know, maybe selfishly, I think that this one is a really unique and welcoming one.
Oh, it's awesome. I think, unfortunately, I feel like in a few years it'll go through a transformation. Almost all communities go through some reckoning where like maybe people who have less, who are more in it just for the self promotion, right? No, I'm not saying that there's no form of self promotion here. There very much is. The opportunity I have for example, like to apply to jobs and say like, oh, hey, here's like my YouTube channel where I show like real work I do, and here's like proof that I can do what I say I can do on my resume, very much exists. But I think you're 100% right that the community is a very awesome place right now, and I hope it stays like that for a long time. But I've been on YouTube for enough years to be like, okay, I'm bracing myself for anything that I may not be a fan of later.
Yeah, I mean, that is a very interesting thing, and it's something that I wrestle with a lot. I mean, I get reached out to now by quite a few sponsors, and I think something that's helped me stay very grounded is that I still have a 9-to-5 job. I still have something that I work on, and so you know, as I mentioned before, money is not my primary like driving factor. And that makes it easier for me to say, hey, like I'm only going to work with sponsors that I believe in. I'm only going to work with sponsors that have tools that I use or that I would use. And I also, you know, I only work with sponsors for like tooling that have a free option always, because most of my audience is on the earlier side. If I'm doing business to business stuff, that's a different thing. But at the same time, that to me is a really important thing. And I know that a lot of people aren't as stringent with that as I am. It's really easy to say, hey, like, you know, how do I, you know, it's really easy to make quick money in a content space. But at the same time, I've always viewed this as something that I want to do for as long as I can. And the quicker you shortchange, or the you know, the looser you get with those decisions, the easier it is for these things to dry up. And you know, we've seen that with some creators in the space already. I think Siraj Raval had some had some falling out with that, and you know, that
plagiarism. You're not supposed to do it, kids. Don't do it.
That's really. He also had some stuff where he was like selling a course for unreasonable amount of money, and to
That's
me,
my value. Like I try and stay away from, so I had a sponsor reach out to me, yeah, and nice people, nothing wrong with them, but they wanted me to teach like a live course for them. And the prices they were charging for these live courses, I was like, I don't know, man, I don't feel comfortable attaching my name to something that expensive. But I mean, yeah, I think everyone has their own value system, and as long as you're very clear about it, that's what's really important. And that's kind of where Siraj got into trouble, right? It's like, one, plagiarizing can't be part of your value system. That's just not acceptable. Um, but yeah, you're right. Like trying to make that quick buck, and I very much share your opinion with that. Like I keep my 9 to 5 job, even if my YouTube channel starts making me a full-time income, I'll keep my 9 to 5 job because it provides me the security to provide, like, to keep making quality content and to not selfishly chase likes, subscriptions, and comments.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting. I mean, like I've made a course. I plan to make more courses in the next
Mhm.
couple of years. One particularly about sports analytics because I don't think there's anything out there. And you get paid to make a course. There's financial upside, but to me, that like enables me to make a really good course, right?
Mhm.
Like the
Mhm.
money that comes in allows me to take time out of some other part of my life and put it into that and make it worthwhile. And like, if my courses were getting awful reviews and you know, it's like, hey, like this is a piece of crap, like, okay, I'm doing something wrong if that's the case, and I shouldn't have put it out. But it's one of these things where it's I see it's easy to like go down that path for finances and content, but I also see that there are very easy mechanisms that we can put in place to make sure that that doesn't
Mhm.
happen. And I expect my community to hold me accountable on those types of things as well. Like again, like I am going to make more courses. I think that they create value. I get excited about making them, and frankly, they do make me money. But if the courses aren't good, like let me know. Like,
Mhm.
if they're not creating value, like that's an error on my part. And even same thing with my YouTube videos. If they're not creating value, like people let me know. And that's a little harder because like those are completely free, and I'm like, guys, like I'm doing
Yeah,
something for you,
yeah.
right?
I think some people forget that, like, small soapbox over here, but like, like we take time out of, to be blunt, other lucrative things that we could be doing to like make free YouTube videos. And I mean, obviously, like legitimate complaints, 100%. I'm here for it. I want to improve. But every once in a while, I get like someone who's like, I am surprised that they complain about me having a Patreon, for example. And I'm like, well, I mean, dude, like, I like this has to be somewhat monetizable in some way, and it's very voluntary. Like, there's no you have to do it or anything. But I think it's important for people to like also respect the time of creators out there and be like, oh yeah, no, these people are like taking time out of their other stuff they could be doing, even just sitting around doing nothing. That's valuable to me too. And you take time out of that to make this content, and 99.9% of people are very respectful of it. But definitely a
Yeah.
message I like to spread around with people. I try and make it very clear on my channel that I'm like, I'm a busy guy, guys. So like, I'll keep making the free content, but you got to respect that it takes time to make.
Yeah, absolutely. And that that is a trade-off that we all have to think about. And um from what I understand, or at least from my experience, like putting out the content, putting out the goodwill, doing those types of things, like it inevitably comes back full circle in a positive way.
Mhm.
I mean, it still sucks when someone's like, hey, the content you're making is like making data science worse. I've had a couple of those, and I'm like, dude,
Oh
like
God.
I'm like,
Oh,
I'm
data
trying to do
science
my best.
elitists.
I
Oh
yeah,
no.
I have a podcast where I interview quite a few people from the field. Like this isn't all just for me, and I make it very clear I'm not an expert. I'm just giving my experiences. And who is someone else to tell me that like my experiences are necessarily wrong in my realm of the world? That's a little bit difficult and painful to think about, because I would never want to like spread a misinformation. That's something that I think
Mhm.
is really important within a data community in general. But I digress. One last thing I really want to talk about, actually, like two things, two concepts that we discussed previously, is the idea of unfair advantage, and also this concept that in theory your life really could change in a day. Do you have some thoughts on that? I know that there are things that you're pretty passionate about.
Yeah. Okay. So as far as like life changing in a day, so I'll go back to the snowball of failure. I graduated college, degree I hated, GPA was horrible. So master's degrees weren't like really in the realm of possibility for me. I'm hoping that they are now, just because I have like a lot of like good work experience. I'm like, hey guys, I have like something real to show you, but that's a separate discussion. Long story short, I was really, really down on myself, and for me, and it's gonna sound a little bit arrogant, but it was like very difficult for me to process that because I was always a high performer in school. So like all of a sudden graduating probably like the bottom X% of my class and with a degree I didn't know what to do with, really, really, really took a toll on my self-confidence. And when you lose your self-confidence, there is, you perform worse, honestly. You don't interview as well. You don't like people respect confidence, so you don't like project as someone who should be respected. And in many cases, people won't respect you after that. And so I would say the moment that like my life changed, like the one day my life changed, right, was the day that I got an offer letter from my first company, Interstate Batteries, with that starting salary. And all of a sudden I was like, it was a huge moment in my life because I'm like, wait a second, someone actually thinks that like what I do is worth this amount of money. And is like, here's like a concrete letter of like, oh yeah. And because also like, remember, even though Texas is what do they call, like a right to work state or something like that, basically you can fire employees like with no warning. No one ever actually does that because you can get taken to court very quickly for it. And the reason I bring that up, right, is because it's like the company's investment is more than just 55K. It's my health insurance. It's like all the benefits that they have to give me. It's the fact that like if I end up performing very poorly, they'll have to like drag me through the court system, and that's expensive for them. There is significantly more investment on their part than just that number on the piece of paper, both in time and money. And they were willing to like give that to me, even though I had zero real experience, just for showing gumption, really. So I think that was like one of those days where like my life turned 100%, where I was like down in the dumps. I have no idea what I'm doing with my life. And then all of a sudden I have this career or this job that's giving me purpose. And then like the 3 months after that, like I realized like 3 months later, really, where I'm like, wow, that like one day, I think it was like August 16th or something is when I started, or 11th or something, gave me the confidence to actually like push myself forward and like be like, oh, I'm like worth something. I have like something to offer to the world. So I would say that's like an example of like how one day can change everything in your life. And like I mean, to be blunt, broadly speaking, my life's just been going, it's been on an upward trajectory since then. And it all started there, right? Because I'd applied to like, 50 jobs prior to that and no one responded.
See, I almost view that in the opposite way, is that you were applying to all these jobs, right? You had done that was when you did that was after the internship, correct?
Correct.
And so you'd done this internship, you'd made really good progress. You were actually like advocating for yourself, looking for work, doing all these things, and that creates really good like positive, like serendipitous events, like good luck, essentially. Like you're creating these random good luck events.
Right.
And the way that in my mind these things work is like it's like tectonic plates in an earthquake, right? Like they're always slowly moving, and then eventually they slip and something positive happens or something negative happens. And so I would argue that yes, it can change in a day, but the things that you did to create that change happened over probably a longer period of time, and there were consistent things that you very likely had control over.
100%. Yeah, no, I mean, you're 100% right. I'm very much a believer of like, so much of the universe is random. The only thing you can control is odds. The world is not deterministic, it's probabilistic. And the only thing you can do is like do stuff to actually improve your odds of like good events happening to you. And that's kind of why I was talking about like, the payoff from like a couple of years of effort prior is now like showing itself today. And you had a second question. I forgot exactly what it was.
Yeah, it was about unfair advantage, but I want to be sensitive of your time, so maybe we can
Oh,
answer
I asked for
that
a couple
on
more
a.
minutes, so
Okay.
we should be, yeah, we should be good for the
Yeah,
question. But
let's touch
thank
a
you.
little bit on unfair advantage. That's a concept that I think is pretty interesting, especially as it frames the data science job landscape.
Yeah. So this is actually a concept I heard from Ali Abdal, who was like a big inspiration for me to start YouTube myself. For anyone that doesn't know,
He's awesome.
he went,
Yeah.
yeah, great guy. He went to Cambridge Medical School, I think, and then like he basically became famous on YouTube by like in a very intelligent way, like leveraging the fact that he was a high performing Cambridge student and talking about like, oh, what is it like to have this like very unique position? At the end of the day, there are only so many high performing Cambridge students in the entire world, right? And so, and then there's maybe a class of like 100 of them, if even right now. And so he was a big inspiration for me to start doing YouTube, because he had this video one day that just said like, just do it, man. And that was basically him the entire video. But it was a great video, and like, you know, I was like, okay. The next day I posted a video. And ironically, that video ended up becoming my most popular one. So serendipitous events. As far as the unfair advantage, the concept, it's actually written by someone else, but I only like remember it from his video. He talks about this idea that like everyone has something, and it sounds really dorky, but everyone has something that they're like particularly good at, or like an unfair advantage. But it's 100% true. And a lot of one method of reaching success is, how are you able to leverage your unfair advantage, or what we would call, or what they call in economics, I think it's called like a comparative advantage or something. Basically, like even if someone is like net on net better than you at something, they might be even better at something else, and you can go ahead and do this thing. So, for example, I think for me, it would be something along the lines of like, I have this just love for knowledge. I just love reading. I love watching. My entire YouTube channel is my YouTube subscription list is just these knowledge creators, and it's just people that like, it's just factual stuff basically. Like that's just what I'm into. And you know, there's a flip side to that. You know, one flip side to that is that like sometimes conversations can be a little bit dry with me, where I'm like, oh, did you hear about this cool thing that happened in this random part of the world? Or you hear about this cool thing that happened in that random part of the world? And like my friend's like, no, bro, but like I had a barbecue last weekend. That was a lot of fun. But I would say the flip side of that, right, is that when I go into an interview, I'm able to really push forward these like disparate pieces of knowledge and like connect them together in like through some like interlocking thread that creates a story that really sticks in like someone's head. So for example, like I will say, I have not been called in for an interview before, but I've never not gotten a job after I've interviewed for them. So I have a 100% hit rate with post interview, but you know, like significantly lower if you count the number of applications I turned in. And that's what I would say is like an unfair advantage. Like, you know, it's all about you to like find out what your unfair advantage is, and to use that to really push forward yourself in life in general. You know, I use this in many different aspects of my life. This like just like lust for knowledge, and I will like try and like dynamically use it like wherever I can. Yeah, that was basically the concept. It was super interesting. I'm really glad I heard that video, and I recommend anyone that is watching this go watch that video. It's not too long, but it's very, very chock full of information.
Yeah, I will definitely try and link that video in the description of the video of this video as well. You know, that's something that I've always thought about in terms of content. I think in terms of technical people, I probably have pretty good communication skills if we're looking at you know, a distribution of everyone in this space. And I also am willing to put myself out there, which a lot of people aren't willing to do. And this combination of different things, as well as my interest in sports and my willingness to pick up, you know, videography or some of these other things, are what made it possible for me to create YouTube, and to create my YouTube channel, and to create a brand, and to start building communities. And I think that that's something that made me very uniquely, I wouldn't say successful, but it's made me able to grow in this space in a way that I feel like I can impact people and I can help people. And it doesn't have to be, you know, the way that I did it. There are plenty of people who are just incredible writers, right? And they can spread word through a blog, or they can create really incredible content and share messages in ways that I cannot do effectively. I personally think that I'm a decent writer, but I also think that the videos that I make, or the way I convey information from spoken word, is way more impactful and way more useful and way more time efficient for me. And that's a perfect example of what we're describing, is that my competitive advantage, or my relative advantage, is a lot higher when I'm producing audio video content versus when I'm producing written content. And
when you hit a really important point there too, of like within, especially within like, you know, you can compare yourself within the industry, right? Like obviously you're really great at this stuff, but you're even better when you consider the fact of like, okay, what about like data science people, you know, people working in the space? Your comparative advantage is even, you know, just blast to the roof then.
Yeah. And, you know, I think this is a really good way to end, is asking the listeners, you know, what is your comparative advantage? You know, comment below. I'd love to hear. But that's always interesting to me, is how do we evaluate ourselves? Something I've been very, very forward about, and at least the last couple episodes, is being introspective, looking in the mirror and trying to understand yourself better, because that's where all the success lies. If you don't understand
Mhm.
your motivations, you don't understand what makes you tick, you don't understand your unfair advantages, how are you supposed to, you know, to navigate the path to what you envision success to be in the future of your life? So definitely a really powerful and kind of exciting and positive way to end things, in my opinion.
Yeah, comment below what what your unfair advantages. I'm excited to see what people say too.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for coming in. This was an awesome episode.
Thank you for having me.
One last thing, how can people reach you? How can they find you on the internet?
Ooh, okay. So my YouTube channel is probably the best way. After that, I would say LinkedIn. Yeah, LinkedIn is probably a great way. And taking a page out of Ken's book, I'm probably going to be a little bit more active on my LinkedIn, and post a little bit more on that as well. So look for me over there.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming in. I really enjoyed this.
All right. Have a great day, Ken.